Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 271. I'm the co-host Kyle Anzalone. Today joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Kyle. How are you?
Doing well and very happy to have you back on the show today, Connor, because you have a really great new article out. It's actually the spotlight today at antiwar.com. And I really like the title of this article, The Long, Lucrative, and Bloody Road to World War III. And so we're going to be breaking that down today, and then also some news on the Iran nuclear deal. And everybody, just want to remind you that you can share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. Twitter handle is at @con_interest. I'm at Kyle Anzalone _. Just a reminder that nothing's going up on Facebook right now because my account has been permanently deleted, and Will, who's the third co-host, although he hasn't been on the show recently but can access the account, is banned from posting. So we're having some trouble getting content up there, but you can follow us on Twitter, anywhere you could listen to podcasts, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey for the video version of the show. If you would like to help the show, support the show, you could donate to the Institute, or there are Patreon, Subscribestar, and crypto information for the show all included. And you can support the show's sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. That saves you 20% off when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kit bag. So it's a great way to get yourself some high quality, great strength CBD products and help the show at the same time. Connor, what do you like from Paloma Verde?
My favorites are the soft gels. You take them after meals and you get like a real full spectrum effect. Definitely help you with any kind of like issues you're having with concentration, inflammation, any kind of anxiety. Just help you relax. And also the gummy bears are delicious. They act really fast. And the tinctures are I think the best bang for your buck because you get the highest quantity and the strongest dose as well. And they're usually in really good flavors too. Like the ones I love are the mints. I forget exactly what the full name is, but absolutely delicious.
All right, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. That saves you again 20%, and it gets the show a kit back. All right, Connor, let's start off talking about your article here. And again, titled The Long, Lucrative, and Bloody Road to World War III. And you got a scary looking picture of maybe the worst member of the House right now. I mean, there's a lot of stiff competition for that, but since we're really focused on Russia, I think Adam Kinzinger is maybe one of the most dangerous people. I guess maybe fortunately he isn't really all that beloved by the Republicans, and since he is a Republican, the Democrats don't really like him either unless he's saying mean things about Trump. But at the same time, as I discussed on the last show, he's introduced a new authorization for use of military force, and this is, I mean, part of this path that we're now on, Connor. I'm worried that his bill is going to sit around for a few weeks and kind of get carried along this path and rolled back out as we get closer to actual confrontation with Russia. So, anyways, take it away. Talk about this great article you have.
The argument that I make is that we're seeing the consensus that the war should keep going basically for as long as possible, and that more oil should be poured on the flames, more weapons sent into Ukraine, more sanctions. All of this seems to be continuing, and nobody's hitting the brakes. And it's getting more and more out of hand as we talk about expanding NATO further, and Russia continues to talk about how they feel more and more threatened, and they continue to talk about the risk of nuclear war. With the whole addition of bringing in Finland and Sweden, we've heard how Russia is planning to put hypersonic missiles and more nuclear weapons into the territory in the Baltics and the Gulf of Finland, as well as more air and sea forces as well. So there's just constant provocations going on from the West, and they don't seem to want to reach any kind of a settlement with the Russians or help the Ukrainians do that. So things are definitely getting out of hand. I mean, one of the reasons why I was motivated to write about this was the absurdity of this whole request from Biden for this $33 billion aid package that would go that it's supposed to cover Ukraine through the end of the fiscal year, which will be at the end of September. But in it is more than $20 billion worth of weapons aid. And they're talking about making sure that we can continue to provide them the Stinger missiles and the Javelins. And obviously, we've been sending a lot more drones and attack helicopters and things like this. And where, I mean, even it's I didn't even mention this in the article, but of course, all this talk about invoking the Defense Production Act and to giving all this basically so that the defense contractors can just have free reign to, have at first access by law to all kinds of resources that they, quote, need to make all these weapons that we have to send to Ukraine. Biden just said the other day, he's talking about like semiconductors, for instance, and he goes, each Javelin that Lockheed makes, Lockheed and Raytheon, it requires 200 semiconductors. So just the opportunity costs in terms, not even necessarily just in terms of the money, but of course all the resources as well. The whole thing is just absurd, and considering we're already spending more on the military than we have before in our history, and it just seems like things are just going to get worse. And so I talk about as well in here about how there really is no room for debate. You're with the Ministry of Truth that's just been founded here now. It seems like.
And Connor, can I make a point on this though about the conversation about the narrative control here? I'm giving a talk tonight, and I've been working on this, and I was thinking about it, and I can't remember a single time where I've ever been asked to condemn an American intervention or anything the U.S. has ever done overseas. Have you ever been asked to condemn anything, the My Lai massacre or the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, or something smaller even, like the drone strike in Kabul? Are you even pressured at all to remotely condemn that or pay any attention to it or care about it whatsoever?
Never. If you bring up, and most people don't even know what's going on in Yemen. Most people don't know what's going on in Syria. It's one of the reasons why I've argued in my last several pieces that I think a great deal of, either the American people don't know about those things, which would be, better than the alternative that they do and they just don't care. But regardless, they certainly do know about, Vietnam and Iraq and all these different things. And so I think I don't know how much of this I would say is exactly what's going on here with the population. I think it's just probably the deluge of propaganda that compels this groupthink and this aggression, because it takes so much to get people to promote policies that could lead to nuclear war. In the old days, you would want to they people were scared to death of this stuff. Hide under your desk, kids, and all these things, and we didn't actively try to provoke the Soviet Union in the same kind of way. They were treated with arguably a lot more respect than Moscow is today. But the fact is, Russia still has more nukes than the U.S. And all these policies that everybody keeps talking about. What's the worst part of it, too, is how the neocons and these other hawks, like Michael McFaul and what have you, when they come out and they say things like, oh, yeah, well, they're not going to use nukes. We shouldn't take that seriously. We shouldn't let that deter us from going further. But to get people to believe all that, it takes a lot of propaganda. But I do think that cynically, our leaders, I hate to use that, our rulers are projecting their crimes and their brutality and their machinations onto others, namely Putin here. And of course, it's very easy for the American people to sort of fall into that too, because it's easier than dealing with putting our own house in order. In other words, and you could put Biden and Obama and Trump on trial for killing hundreds of thousands of Yemeni children, but that's not as politically expedient as getting more money for Stingers and Javelins to send to Ukraine. So now, in addition to all of this, we have NATO expanding to Finland and Sweden, of course. We're expanding that's likely going to happen, unfortunately, it looks like. And that would extend the border with NATO on Russia. That would extend the NATO's borders on Russia's borders by 800 miles. Moscow plans to, as I said, respond by increasing air and naval forces in the Baltic Sea and reinforcing Kaliningrad, which is their territory, the enclave or exclave in between Poland members NATO and Poland and Lithuania. And so they're talking about sending more nukes to the area and hypersonics. And it's not like that deters it. That doesn't deter NATO. That doesn't deter the U.S. They're just launching now the Defender Europe 2022 exercises, which are smaller than what we dealt with last year in those same exercises, as you covered on the show, on the most recent show. But still, it's ridiculous. I mentioned here, of course, that the naval presence, the military presence in the Mediterranean Sea from NATO right now and Russia is at Cold War levels. And so we have, of course, Lavrov constantly comparing or talking about the risk of nuclear war, as I said earlier, or, you could put differently, World War III. He's even compared the situation that Russia is in right now to the Cuban Missile Crisis. But then we get reports about how senior Pentagon officials are saying, oh, yeah, but, we're not concerned about it. We're monitoring their capabilities all the time. And tell you the truth, we don't see a threat to NATO or to anything. So it's just it's mind boggling that they can just kind of say that. And then, of course, you have all the hawks, like I said earlier, saying, nah, don't worry about it, everybody. We can do whatever we want. And as Ken, doesn't seem to be much concern, again, about what could happen in Europe, how destabilized things could get, knowing that we have, as the White House, as sources have said, the White House has almost zero ability to keep track of all the weapon systems that they're sending into Ukraine, that they're falling into a big black hole, as people who are briefed with intelligence told CNN. They don't. They're not concerned when the Russians say that all these weapons are threatening to destabilize all of Europe and could expand the war. Instead, we have the Foreign Secretary of England saying that Liz Truss says we should double down on arms shipments and especially on heavy weapons, tanks, airplanes. She says digging deep into our inventories, ramping up production. We need to do all this. And Blinken has a quote where he is basically hinting at regime change. He goes, the strategy that we've put in place, massive support for Ukraine, massive pressure against Russia, solidarity with more than 30 countries engaged in these efforts is having real results. The bottom line is this: we don't know how the rest of this war will unfold, but we do know that a sovereign, independent Ukraine will be around a lot longer than Vladimir Putin is on the scene. Now, I'm not saying that there's, that I don't even think necessarily Putin is trying to take all of Ukraine at this point. But regardless, just talking about Putin's not going to be around much longer. We don't know how it's going to unfold, but that's kind of the end goal. He's virtually talking about regime change there. And just like his boss did in Poland at the end of March, which everybody said was a gaffe. But the more and more we learn about, the long-term policies that America and its allies are talking about, digging in for the long haul, sending in more weapons, cutting off Europe from Russian energy, and isolating Russia and looking towards sort of a new world order where they no longer seek to even coexist, as they say in the article in the Post, with Russia. Now, let's see. Austin, of course, says that they want to weaken Russia's ability to even defend itself conventionally, regardless of what you think about what Russia is doing in Ukraine. When Austin says things like, when it comes to Russia's war, when he says that we want to see Russia weaken to the degree that it cannot do the kind of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. It has already lost a lot of military capability and a lot of its troops. Quite frankly, we don't want to see them. We want to see them not have the capability to very quickly reproduce that capability. That's the second time I think we've covered on this show where Austin says capability like 6 or 7 times in a sentence. So, now, listen, regardless of what, we think about what's going on in Ukraine, Russia with its okay, Russia, unless it's really like broken through this proxy war, will in all likelihood maintain its ability to fight a war just outside its borders. I mean, imagine if somebody was conducting a proxy war with us by pitting, say, Mexico or Canada against the United States, and overthrew the governments like 8 years ago, started a war with another population in the country, and then basically, let's say at this point, it looks more and more like, or we don't even have to say this necessarily, that they lured, let's say, the Americans into attacking, but let's say America felt threatened or felt like they had to do something, and invaded next door. And now the other powers are saying, well, we want to essentially break their military to the point where they can't fight just outside their borders anymore. I'm not sure that we would even be living to talk about this at this point if the shoe were on the other foot. So let's see. So now, of course, I point out that Raytheon is making a ton of money, and this is where Austin walked off the board of directors to lead the Pentagon. Now, one of the, as I quote Ron Paul here, just saying that one group of special interests profiting massively on the war is the military-industrial complex. He quotes Greg Hayes, the CEO of Raytheon, who recently said, everything that's being shipped into Ukraine today, of course, is coming out of stockpiles, either at DoD or from our NATO allies. And that's all great news. Eventually, we'll have to replenish it, and we will see a benefit to the business. So it's, right out in the open. I mean, obviously, we've covered before, actually, there was a great, revealing, quotes that are, I think, should be a much bigger deal than they are. But it was basically quarterly earnings calls with people. I think Greg Hayes, actually, in particular, talking to shareholders, and they're just saying basically like, yeah, well, as more and more tensions crop up in the South China Sea, and now with the Houthis, attacking the UAE, and the war in Yemen getting worse, and of course this conflict in Ukraine that's brewing, I think we're going to see some real benefits this year. Like, that's how they look at all of this. Now, of course, I make the point that you'd want to oppose some sort of a status quo, but things continue to get worse and worse at such an alarming rate. I mean, now we have English troops in Kiev, SAS troops, Special Air Service, special forces, training the English on how to use the anti-tank weapons that London is sending Ukraine. We have American troops now openly training Ukrainian forces in Germany and at 2 other secret locations in Europe on heavy artillery and radar systems and armored vehicles. Washington is expanding intelligence sharing with Kiev for its war in the Donbass. There was recently a transport plane, a military transport plane of the Russians, that was shot down with the aid of U.S. intelligence, that killed hundreds of Russian soldiers. And we've sent them 144,000 rounds of artillery and vehicles to carry around all these howitzers. We've been sending them, I think, 90 howitzers is what's been sent officially at this point. Poland has sent in more tanks. Slovenia is planning to send their T-72 tanks, battle tanks as well. I think they have a deal with the Germans that they'll be replacing those with some tanks that they have as well. And the Germans are now sending anti-aircraft tanks, and the Pentagon is saying, at least Kirby said, like on the 20th of last month, that he won't say who, but some European ally has provided the Ukrainians more fixed-wing fighter aircraft than they had, I think he said 2 weeks ago. Now, let's see. Now, the Armed Forces Minister of London said that he thinks attacking, targets inside Russia, the Ukrainians, he goes, that's completely legitimate, and it wouldn't be a problem if they did it with the weapons we're supplying. And this comes in the midst of an uptick of reports from even some of the drones that I believe that Turkey has supplied the Ukrainians, and helicopter assaults on Russian oil depots, villages, and other residential areas. Now, again, I mean, these things are bound to happen if you invade a country, but at the same time, again, the war is going to expand, and the fact that the British are talking like this, would never be accepted if the shoe were on the other foot. Now, Let's see. Yeah, we have London saying that they need to cut off. I think this is Liz Truss as well, saying that we should cut off all Russian energy once and for all from Europe, which of course would cause massive recessions, um, and make war much more likely. And it just with everything going on, I guess I closed it by talking about how Adam Kinzinger's AUMF is very risky, of course, because they're putting out a red line in order to try and trap Biden in the same way the same sort of hawks did this to Obama while he was during the war in Syria. And with the absolute, like, virtually total support. Even the people that oppose a lot of this legislation that keeps coming in the House and the Senate, and well, there's almost no opposition really in the Senate, but in the House, it's usually Republicans, sometimes people in the squad. It still doesn't really amount to anything because there's such a minority that virtually everything gets passed. So it's, we hope that this bill won't get passed and it'll just kind of linger there. But that's dangerous, too, because as we said, as the war gets worse, they may end up just deciding that, well, if they keep hyping it up, like that was one of the big concerns before the war started, that this idea that there's going to be a false flag. So as the Ukrainians were building up forces on the eastern side of the contact line, thousands and thousands, I think some estimates even said like 100,000, preparing for an assault, there was this argument that the Russians were building up, of course, at the same – they were. But the argument was that Russia is going to go ahead and launch a false flag so that they can invade Ukraine. And the thing is when you say stuff like that, it tells, certain – militant groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda and their Turkish allies in Syria, or if you're talking about the Azov battalion, who obviously have a reason after, the way they've fared so far in the war to want to, seek some outside intervention. You're basically putting out an invitation for someone to create a false flag, some kind of plausible attack that can plausibly be blamed on the other side, in this case, Russia, to justify the U.S. intervention. So it's extremely risky. And of course, I just go ahead and talk about some of the reporting, of course, that Dave DeCamp has done that talks about the history of these different research laboratories, including like biological research laboratories in Ukraine, that even the head of the Cooperative Threat Reduction Agency has admitted may contain some Soviet-era bioweapons, and that he was concerned that it was possible that in the midst of the war, there could be an accident where those pathogens get released. And also, we know the World Health Organization told Ukraine to destroy their high threat pathogens around the time the war started. So regardless of what happens next, it seems like there's quite a few targets that could be hit by anybody who's looking to manufacture consent for this. For this to go ahead and attack Ukraine directly, attack Russia directly in Ukraine. If there's any kind of incident with chemical weapons or biological weapons or whatever, even if it isn't Russia, because obviously it's very difficult to find all that stuff out, and they'll already be beating the war drums and getting everything going before we even know the truth.
Yep. That is so the American public's attention span is so short, and they want justice immediately. They can never wait for the truth, and so just whatever immediate reaction is put out and spun by the media, they immediately grab onto, and of course that is likely to be the nuclear weapons. Connor, should we move on and talk about this Iran stuff? On the show last week, I believe I mentioned Iran a little bit in that it seemed that talks were not going well, was that they were at a standstill, that there was some positive signs maybe from both sides, but some negative signs from both sides. So where do you think we are right now? And yeah, just updates from, the last week or so on what's happening, or I guess mostly not happening with the Iran talks.
Right. Yeah. So it's they've been essentially at a stalemate for 7 weeks now, where there just hasn't been much movement at all. Now, it does appear that indirect talks are still going on through the EU moderators, but it's not. There hasn't. I mean, the Iranians are actually calling for face-to-face meetings, and one of the reasons is back in March, I think I would argue, toward late December and probably March, maybe the middle of March, it really did appear like they were going to return to the deal. And then uh, the because even in the first couple of weeks of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the war starting, even though when the Russians, everybody acted like, oh, these demands about how they're not going to they want to be exempt from sanctions so they can continue to do the business that they're entitled to in the Iran deal, that they're going to make a whole thing about this and make sure that the sanctions blitz doesn't affect all that and it's going to ruin the deal. But all of that got worked out extremely quickly. And so uh, when so after that, though, there was this issue of the IRGC being the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps being still on this international terrorist blacklist on from the U.S. government, and so that increases the sanctions on all these people, and it's obviously a huge affront to the Iranian government because the Quds Force and the IRGC, this is part of their military. It's a part of the state. It's not a terrorist organization, and the only, or at least on that list anyway, there are no other state actors on the list. And there's all kinds of problems with it. I mean, people have all kinds of immigration issues, and not there's a lot of there's conscription involved, and people who even if you were totally against the IRGC or just thought that these people are monsters or something, well, a lot of the people that serve in there, they're not even doing military work. And they happen to be conscripted, and then they go on to become doctors or something, and so it's just
right.
it's
Ron Paul was in the military. You
yeah.
know what I mean? And he was a flight doctor and stuff. And so these are the kind of people that are going to get sanctioned in Iran too. It's not just everybody thinks of whatever rugged looking Iranian man they throw on the cover of their IRGC propaganda to get the youth willing to sign up. The big buff dudes they'll shoot you and rip your head off or something like that. That's not what we're really talking about here, who's mainly suffering under these sanctions. It's not the Iranian leadership, it's again the Iranian people, conscripts, and just people who now do regular jobs like lawyer, mechanic, doctor, whatever else.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's been a ton of stories about that recently since this became such an issue, and it breaks up families and it's just devastating. But so basically the Iranians are not budging on that issue. And now again, if you know the history of all this, the Iranians are the aggrieved party here. They're the ones who have been on sanctions. Tens of thousands of people. I've never really seen up to date, like accurate estimates of the excess death rate from the maximum pressure campaign. However, when you consider the fact that basic necessities and staple goods like housing, automobiles, and staple foods were driven up. The prices were driven up so high, and we know deliberately from people like Richard Nephew, who brags about it. He calls himself a sanctions artist. Served in the Obama administration, then was one of the he was working as a part of under Robert Malley's Iran team, which is a huge affront to the Iranian people. And just that was when that was announced in like March. Thankfully, he no longer holds that post, but it was basically an indication that the maximum pressure campaign, for all intents and purposes, was here to stay, and that may actually ultimately be the case. But nevertheless, the sanctions have caused horrible medical shortages, particularly affecting people who have like cancer and hemophilia and HIV or AIDS or multiple sclerosis. And it's just been brutal. But so the Americans pulled out of the deal unilaterally, illegally. So the idea that they are refusing, they go, well, we're not going to, that's outside the JCPOA. And we're not going to agree to that because you have to agree to a bunch of other concessions that we want from you, the Iranians, that are outside of the deal. And actually, what's awful about this is it reminds me of the very beginning of the Biden administration, where they basically thought that they would use the maximum pressure campaign and all the sanctions that Elliott Abrams and all these guys had added, particularly in the last years of the Trump administration, where actually Abrams is doing it like every week toward the end, but they were going to use that leverage in order to extract concessions from the Iranians that the Trump administration was seeking, that were obvious non-starters, and namely that they would get rid of their ballistic missile program, which is their primary deterrence, and cut off their alliances and partnerships with all of their asymmetrical allies in the region, whether that be with Hezbollah or Bashar al-Assad, or even support for Hamas, or they would argue like the Houthis and all this kind of stuff, which is that's propaganda for all intents and purposes. But that, nevertheless, they're talking about having a completely non-independent foreign policy and being basically disarmed. So Iran, encircled by enemies, by the Abraham's Accords countries, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the U.S., would never accept that, and no sane state would ever do anything like that. So now at this point, it does appear that I do think that at some point, it looked like when I saw that massive campaign that we talked about from Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate, and these like former intelligence officials and people like Elliot Abrams coming back and just writing like letter after letter, giving speeches and proposing that you stay out of the deal, and saying that the Iranians are terrorists, and making a big thing about this IRGC issue, that they're basically threatening Biden at the with an eye toward the midterms, that they would be extremely politically costly, as we said earlier, given how hawkish politics here in domestic politics are, the way that ironically getting back into a non-proliferation agreement could come at a huge cost, because the Republicans are all unanimously against anything regarding like reducing tensions with Iran. And of course, the Israel lobby plays a huge role in that. And when Blinken and Mark Milley started coming out and making all these comments about how the IRGC are terrorist groups, and Blinken even said on TV how he doesn't think that the deal will ever get done again, because he doesn't think the Iranians are serious or want to return to compliance, and the time is running out. Well, it turned out the week that they were making all those statements, and this was going on with this sort of opposition campaign, the Israeli, one of Bennett's top foreign policy advisors, was in Washington meeting with officials. But now we just got reports that Eyal Kulata, who's Jake Sullivan's his Israeli counterpart, has been in Washington doing meetings, and this was roughly at the beginning of last week. And so this is an article from Jason Ditz where he's at antiwar.com, where he's talking about how the Israeli media now is like full of quotes about how the deal is done, and that the Americans are telling them that it's basically over. So I'm quoting from a piece also from Ted Snyder, who has the quotes in here, where Israel Hayom and Khan public broadcasters saying things like, the possibility that the parties will sign an agreement in the foreseeable future is dwindling at an exceptional rate. Israeli officials claim that the White House is much more willing these days than it was in the past to admit that the talks are likely to fail. Barak Ravid, the journalist, I believe at Axios, said that the Biden administration has recently started discussing a scenario in which the nuclear deal isn't revived. And there's also reports in Reuters as well talking about how other Western countries are saying how basically they see the deal as dead as well, and that it's on life support, basically. And they do cite in there the American domestic politics, that Biden, one of the reasons why it's difficult for Biden to do what needs to be done to return to the deal, is because they fear reprisal from hawkish Democrats and the Republicans, of course, at the midterms. All right. So now also Biden spoke with Bennett this weekend, and Biden is planning now, or they're in the planning stages of scheduling Biden's first visit to Israel. And it's not definite yet, but that should happen in months. And their conversation when they're going to be over there is expected to largely center on Iran, which is also not a good sign because it probably means that not much is going to change. In the meantime, Biden might even be planning to announce that we're not returning to the deal to score some political capital by doing that in Tel Aviv or something. So, when he's meeting with Bennett. So, let's see. Now, the Americans basically paint it like the IRGC thing is the only issue, still preventing a deal from coming through, although there are EU officials who are contesting this and saying that there's still several things that need to be worked out. And I think that's basically what the Iranians were saying. If you looked at their quotes in the run-up to this scandal, they were saying that there were still issues about like the scope of sanctions relief, and other issues about, just to what degree will Iran be able to reap the benefits of returning to the deal. And so there were still things that weren't exactly certain. Although, from what I understand, the agreement is about like 27 pages, and it does sound like they secured a much better deal than the Rouhani government accomplished before. But obviously, there's still some things that need to be worked out. But a lot of reports will tell you, and I think it's basically true, that the wording of it is nearly completed. Now, let's see. Now, the White House, this is where it gets even worse. So we do have like the Europeans is, despite this claim about how they think that some of these unnamed officials or sources are saying to Reuters that they think we're pretty sure the whole thing is done. There was an open letter signed by over 40 influential European officials, including former foreign ministers from 9 countries, the former prime ministers of Sweden and Norway, a former IAEA director, a general named Hans Blix, even a former NATO Secretary General named Javier Solana. And they've all implored the U.S., as Ted Snyder says here, to swiftly show decisive leadership and requisite flexibility to resolve the remaining issues of political, not nuclear, disagreement with Tehran. And they express growing concern that the final text is essentially ready and on the table, but negotiations to restore Iranian compliance with and a U.S. return to the JCPOA appear to have entered a period of stasis that threatens to undo the real and welcome progress made in recent months toward reinstating a non-proliferation agreement, which is crucial for international peace and security. Okay, so that's positive, and hopefully that has some effect. But at the same time, as we hear more and more of this rhetoric from the Israelis, the Americans are now pouring fuel on this fire too. So Jen Psaki was asked a question about the threat of Iran getting a nuclear weapon, and she said, she said that she basically said that they're very concerned about it, that they could achieve weapons capability within a matter of weeks. And let me see if I can find the exact quote from her. Let's see. She said, yes, it definitely worries us. And then they walked that back. The White House said, although Psaki responded to a question about nuclear weapons, she was referring to the breakout time, which is the time it would take to obtain sufficient fissile material for one nuclear bomb, and was not referring to the production of an actual nuclear weapon. But nevertheless, I mean, rhetorically, it has much the same effect. More people probably heard Psaki than the official walk back the next day. Now, Blinken is telling, he says to a Senate panel, also, I would add that Blinken is saying some of the same things. Even when he argues that he thinks we should still return to the deal, or that it's still very important to do that, he always says he has to hype up the threat of Iran in order to justify that, which again is understandable due to the hawkish nature of politics here. But he says things like, the deal had a breakout time of a year, and now because of Trump, they could get basically that they could have a nuclear breakout, he goes, in a matter of weeks. And there's a lot of reasons why that's just a phony claim. Now, Yeah, as Jason says here, the claims about nuclear weapons are very false. Iran has never produced weapons-grade uranium. The highest grade they are producing is 60%, and it took them multiple months to produce 7 kilograms, which is nowhere near enough for a weapon. Even it had been reached to 90%. And of course, it takes even months or years for them to actually build a weapon. This, as he says, the whole within weeks rhetoric is built around the idea that of all the uranium they have could cumulatively be enough for a single weapon. The idea is that if, it tends to be built around the idea that at some point all the uranium would cumulatively be enough for a single weapon if enriched to a level that Iran has never attempted, and totally ignoring all the other steps that it takes to make one. Now, and of course, the ironic thing too is that they would have to conduct a test, and then they would be back to square one. Now, let's see. So also, Blinken is claiming and telling Congress that without evidence that Iran is seeking to assassinate Mike Pompeo. Now, I found this particularly egregious because I read in the AP a few weeks ago that they are spending $2 million a month to protect him and provide him like 24-hour security detail. And apparently they're doing the same thing for Brian Hook, and $13 million has been spent on this so far. Like I said, $2 million a month. But Blinken made a huge deal out of this. And he says that he told Congress that he was confirming the details of a State Department report made public last month. And he's decided to extend the security detail. He says, I'm not sure what I can say in an open setting, but let me say generically that there is an ongoing threat against American officials, both present and past. We are making sure, and we will make sure for as long as it takes, that we're protecting our people, present and former, if they're under threat. And he even said this, and this is so egregious, but he goes, Iran needs to stop targeting our people, period. You know, after all the assassination of Soleimani, of course, and the Israeli assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, to even claim that. And of course, they don't provide any evidence for the idea that anyone's trying to kill Mike Pompeo. Certainly not. There's not that there's Iranian assassination attempts going on U.S. soil, but he says that it's a serious, incredible threat, and we're just supposed to take him at his word, I guess. Now, the Biden administration, I will say this, Blinken also said, again, like I said before, that he still is saying that the door is not closed, that it's still possible for a deal to happen. But if Iran wants them to take the IRGC off that blacklist, they need to actually justify that, he says. But really what it is they're trying to use this, and Trump put that in the deal or added that sanction and that designation originally as sort of a poison pill to prevent a return to the deal in the future, because we've seen how politically toxic the whole issue has been. And the last thing is that the Mossad is claiming that Iran, again without evidence, that Iran is trying to assassinate different official, like an Israeli diplomat. And this is pretty ironic. They claim that that the Iranians tried to assassinate an Israeli diplomat at a consulate in Istanbul. So just a few shades of Khashoggi there. But they also say they tried to target a French journalist and a U.S. general in Germany. And the report is unsourced. But they added that a single IRGC member was arrested in an unnamed country. And of course, this fits in perfect with the narrative right now. Actually, with the narrative even that they're trying to go after Pompeo too, but certainly in this idea that the IRGC shouldn't be taken off the blacklist and that they're a terrorist network and all this. And it's just perfect propaganda for the Iranians, for the Israelis right now to keep the U.S. out of the deal. And that does appear to be, unfortunately, at the moment, the way things are going. Now, the Iranians have said that there is still that basically actually, let's see. The Iranians are saying that they're ready for those face-to-face meetings. The talks aren't dead yet. Things are still there's still indirect talks going on, like I said, with the Europeans mediating, but it's still going very slow. and they said that basically the Americans need to take the political initiative to get things going again. And then Jason Ditz adds here on this last report that Senator Todd Young, who's a Republican, condemned Iran's terrorist policies and said no U.S. president after Biden would honor the deal anyway. And he told that to the Iranian press. So, I mean, obviously, this is, Ted Cruz has said very similar things. The big issue, of course, is that if the Democrats don't return to the deal, everyone knows the Republicans won't. And it's just, I mean, we've talked about before how the fallout of this could lead to a situation where Iran is goaded out of leaving the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And in that case, if the deal really is dead, you go back to a situation where we get more brinksmanship in the Middle East and threats of war all over again. And it's such a shame because it's perfect. It's a perfectly good. I mean, the deal isn't even necessary. Of course, I mean they've never sought nukes, but at the same time, it's a great way to keep war off the table because there's just no way anybody could lie well enough to make it look like they are. But unfortunately, it looks like we're probably headed back down that path. I don't see the Biden administration doing the right thing here anytime soon. And I do think they are very concerned about how the Republicans and the people like Bob Menendez, who's still, waging a war against the JCPOA from his post as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So there's heavy influence pushing Biden away from this. And I don't think they were ever all that sincere to begin with. I just thought that the Iranians had gotten the upper hand in the negotiations. But ultimately, it seems like it wasn't enough to actually see the thing through. But anything could change here. So we'll keep track of it and see what happens next.
All right, Connor, thank you for that update on the Iran talks and for coming back to the show this week. You'll be back on next week, of course, as you're here every week as the co-host. And just everybody check out the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, where you can find pretty much everything that me and Connor do, either originally posted at the Institute or, linked to at antiwar.com. Thank you, Connor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kyle. Thanks, everybody.